housing
Thank
bill.
you, Sam, Brian and Pat, for being here and for your statements. I'm a bit shocked at what has been mentioned. Deputy Éireann mentioned Grenfell, and you were saying, but for the grace of God. Then we were mentioning fire wardens. I mean, it does sound like a very grave situation. And as you say, but for the grace of God, nothing has happened. But as a housing committee, I know in my own area, in County Kildare, back a number of years ago, 6 units of housing were completely destroyed in Newbridge, in half an hour. And there was meant to be an hour's fire rating between each one, and it failed in minutes. Thankfully, as you said, but for the grace of God, there were no fatalities. Yeah. But it did show what happens when regulation and inspections break down. But what shocked me about that scenario was that there's a huge insurance and accountability gap. And the builders had insurance, the professionals all had insurance, had a professional indemnity cover and all that, this home bond. Yet somehow, when these type of defects appear, everybody runs for cover, and none of the insurances that were meant to be in place seem to protect anybody, not the owners, not the management companies, and not the state. And then you and me end up paying for it as taxpayers.
Well, I think you've put your finger on something that I think is a massive problem here. And accountability is exactly the point. And I think one of the things that has been extraordinarily frustrating, and I've been working on this nearly 9 years, is the fact that there has been no accountability, the fact that there have been no consequences for the people who actually built shaddily. And there still aren't consequences for people who build shaddily. That's a reality, because how they operate is that they set up a separate company for each development. And what they do, that company just holds enough assets to actually just complete that particular development, special purpose vehicle companies, which they then liquidate. And so, to use the phrase, there is no mark for recovery.
But Pat, usually, and I get that, and then you set up a different company and you do another gig, but it's the professionals that certify the work that are meant to be indemnified.
So I think where the issue came up, to be fair, was actually there was a significant flaw in relation to the building regulations that applied between 1991 to early 2014. And it's more the flaw in terms of the oversight mechanisms within that. And that's why they were changed in 2014. And that's also why the scheme in terms of defects applies during the lifetime of those particular regs. So all that was required from a certification point of view was an inspection upon completion. And that's a visual inspection upon completion. The reality is fire stopping, or the lack of it, is not amenable to a visual inspection upon completion. Why? Because it's behind plastic, behind wall panels. It's under floorboards. It's in ceilings. It's in external walls. The only way that you can detect this, and this comes back to even putting together an application for grants, is you have to do opening up works, is you actually literally have to bore holes in walls, in floors and ceilings to see is fire stopping there or not. So they have changed the regulatory framework so that now it is required that there are inspections during the construction process. Whereas then there were not.
By who?
So in this case, it's a mixture of both the builders and indeed then what they call the certifiers. Yes, so we were talking about architects, engineers.
But all of those people were involved in the initial...
Yeah, but what happened, to be frank, in these cases, they were only involved in developing the plans, and then the builder went off and built, and then they were called back in at the end to say, certify that basically I built according to the plans. And they go around and they would look and see, oh yeah, well, on the face of it, it appears to be built in accordance with the plans. It was actually the system was wrong, that it didn't allow for inspection during construction.
And
that was the problem.
But Pat, I'm wondering, has the system changed? I know you're saying on
not
paper,
sufficiently.
But should we get local authorities and give them responsibility for inspection?
Local authorities need more resources. Building control is still hugely under-resourced in terms of personnel to actually carry out this work. Now, there is an attempt at national level, it's what's called the Building Control Office, National Building Control Office, and I know they're talking about putting this on a statutory basis. It operates out of Dublin City Council at the moment. But in my view, what you should be looking at doing is, something akin to the revenue commissioners or, say, the health and safety authority, where you have task forces that can go in and blitz an area, and you put the fear of God in that there's a real chance I might get caught, so I need to, up my game. Because the reality is, there's a bit of a myth around that the people who built these things they've all gone, they're not around. That's simply not true. Most of the biggest builders, and Chair, I'm not going to mention anybody, but most of the biggest builders in this state were involved in that shoddy building. And they are still operating, they are still building some of the most high-profile companies, and they have suffered no consequences, and not one of them has put their hands in their pockets to actually pay for the remediation. And that is going to be coming out of the taxpayer's pocket, not those who created this mess in the first place.
And Pat, that's my whole point, that if you don't change the way you build and certify, we're going to be spending billions now fixing the last disaster while waiting for the next one.
Well, I think what we need to do is there have to be consequences, and I think there's a number of things we need to look at. Number one, we need to look at lifting the veil of incorporation, so that, for instance, in cases where, directors of companies have basically tried to keep their assets off books, that those assets can be reached. You can lift the veil of incorporation and get at those assets in those cases. I think we need to look at, frankly, cases where people who build shoddily shouldn't be able to, and I know this is happening in the UK, they shouldn't be able to tender for public works. In my view, it's totally wrong that people who just pay no heed to the building regulations can simply trot around and be able to get contracts. And likewise too, we need to change the law of tort, to change the statute of limitations, because at the moment it's 6 years from when the defects become manifest, which is not when you discover them. So in most cases when the defects are discovered, the statute of limitations has long passed.
Okay. Can I just ask you finally, is there any examples of successful indemnity claims? Home bond? None?
None. Not sorry. There have been on water ingress. I do know that Premier Guarantee have paid out some. There may be other companies, but all I would say is that has been challenging to get those things. So even when liability was accepted, it had been extraordinarily difficult to get the money and hugely time consuming.
So once again, the taxpayer is...
Yes.
Just to add to what you asked there about home bond and that, in our development we found with the roof, it was built, there was a corrugated roof, and then they decided, it's too noisy for the apartments, and they came along, they drilled timber down onto it and they put felt onto it to down the noise. But then after that, the water started coming down to where they drilled all the holes. So we did get a whole new roof. I think it was close to 900,000, and that was under the home bond. Okay. Because we were within the 6 years, the statute of limitation at the time. Okay. So we were lucky that's when we caught that.
But they would be very much the exception rather than the rule. So it has been, in the first instance, the owners themselves who've had to pony up money. And obviously the government agreed in January 2023 that the state would fully fund defects works. But I think that there is a massive, that unless there's some price to pay for shoddy building, it's going to continue. That's my perspective on it.
But having fire wardens, is a recipe. You're waiting for. You mentioned an example of a charger I mean, the fire warden will not see the charger going on fire in a bedroom.
No.
So, I mean, that's a whole disaster. Thanks.
Sam, didn't you have a case of a fire through, there was a glass table on a balcony?
We had 3 near misses. We had a guy out having a smoke on the balcony late at night, and he flicked the cigarette out, and the wind blew it back in 2 floors below onto they had artificial grass, and that caught fire. Lucky enough, the woman was home. She came out and she put it out with basins of water. We had another one a couple of months later. Same thing again, guys smoking up in the balcony, threw out a cigarette. There was a plastic box on the balcony with toys and a kid's colouring book. That caught fire. Lucky enough again, there was somebody there. The last one we had was a fella having a smoke, taxi driver, before he went to work in the car park. And he threw the smoke down the storm drain. There was loose papers in it. The papers went on fire. The smoke came back through the pipe, up through the whole building. The neighbours rang in and said, look, we've a fire in the building, we can see smoke. The fire brigade turned out 7 fire units, a rescue unit, 2 ambulances and a fire officer, because they knew of the defects in the building. And then the last one we had was a guy went out and filled his car, a diesel car with petrol. And when he came home, what did he do? He emptied it all down the storm drain, which ran right into the plant room. I got a call Sunday, there's a smell of gas in the building. I said, you don't have gas in the building. I'm on my way over. So when I came over to trace it back, I was there till 10:30 that night hosing out the drains. Because if he had come along having his other smoke, the whole building was gone. So we're living in constant danger of this, and there's nothing happening.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Senator. Deputy Gold.
Yeah, I suppose